Hello and welcome to Painting the Light Brigade. For this project I'm using Irregular miniatures 2mm blocks of horse. 4 of the 5 regiments are using BG 11, which is loose order cavalry, and the 17th Lancers are BG 10, which, funny old thing, are Lancers. I've decided to base each regiment on 25mm square bases, and each squadron will have 6 of those bases with 2 strips each. One of the bases will have the commanding officer out front. The first task is to get some sand PVA down onto all those bases, being careful not to get too many grains all over the little men. Once that's dried, it's a base coat of light brown, some cheapy acrylic stuff I picked up at the local art shop, a bit of a wash, and then highlighted with Vallejo Iraqi sand. We are now ready to start painting the 11th Hussars, the cherry bums. The first thing I'm going to do is the horses, and for this I've got a base colour of Vallejo beige brown, and that'll be the majority of the little horses here. Quick lick with a fairly fine brush on the rumps and the heads. Obviously the horses on the side just get a little bit more attention. On to the jackets. Here I've got a Foundry Sky Blue 21B, so that's the mid-range of their tricolour system. To be honest, I'm just using what paints I have. I haven't necessarily picked out anything specifically for these, or indeed any of my minis that I paint, and I'll obviously backfill accordingly. Had Foundry for a long time, to be honest, but I'm gradually working my way through the little pots and replacing them with Vallejo. Now that's done, I do like to do a few alternative colours for the horses. That first base colour has dried, so I'll pick out the odd 1 or 2, and this time I'm using Vallejo flat brown. I also use greys and blacks for other stands, but not too many. I think it's far easier to keep the majority of them the light and medium coloured brown for these. Right, time for the hats, and that's just a simple Vallejo black, little dab on the top and just a check around the sides just to make sure I've got them all covered. I've just got to be a bit careful with the chap who's got the pennant. There, simple. Aha, and it's the moment we've been waiting for. The red pants, the red trews. Again, this is Foundry, it's their mid-range bright red 15B. So a little dab down the outer leg on each of the horsemen, and I have on these chaps put a little dash in between the horses. I haven't really bothered too much with that because, to be honest, you're not going to see too much of it. Just going over some of the legs here because the first application there wasn't particularly good. And just adding that little bit of colour does make an awful lot of difference to the state of the troopers at the moment. The pennant gets a dash of red as well, and also there's a little tassel on each of their hats, so I do put that on, even though you're probably not going to be able to see it. I use Vallejo Stone Grey for the little roll of greatcoat which is sat behind the trooper on top of the horse's rump. Now this is obviously a very light colour, and you'll notice that most of my colours are lighter than they would ordinarily be. That's what you have to do for the old 2mm figures or the smaller figures. So this one is obviously very light, but it also just does start to break up some of the darker colours from a distance when you look at the horses. Just going over one there because obviously the greatcoat roll was too big. And we're on to horsetails, a little dash of off-white on the rump. And turning them around, a little dash of white on their noses and snouts. I think you can see now, even at this scale, it's starting to come together, and you can definitely see the differences between the various parts of the horse and the trooper on top. Now, I also do a little dab for faces. This is Foundry Flesh Light 5C. However, I'm not bothering with any black for moustaches, beards, sideburns or the like. A dab of demonic yellow from Army Painter War Paints, of all things. That's just because it's a bright yellow, and that goes on the pennant, just to indicate the crest of the regiment in the middle of that. And finally, it's a little stripe of bright silver for their sabre. And that's a little bit fiddly, and sometimes you can't even see where some of these sabres are, which is a bit of the pain in the butt. And obviously I've got a little bit too much paint on my brush there, and I'll have to go back and tidy some of that up. And there we go, that's the finished article from the painting perspective. Not too bad, and to be honest, that took about 10 minutes. Obviously slightly shortened in this video. Right, basing time. I've got my Flock Light Mix, which is just a mixture of 3 different types. A dab of watered down PVA on the base, and a little bit of a sprinkle over the top. To be honest, I do a lot of my bases like this and find it quite simple and effective, well, from my perspective anyway. I don't stick any big clumps of foliage on these things, or indeed flowers. Once that's on, I'll just put another dab of PVA just to hold it in place, although I will be spraying these with a matte varnish, so probably don't need to do that. Finally, just a little brush there to make sure all the bits of flock are off the figures. Et voila! And now for a parade.